Today we're going to be reviewing some of your comics, looking at the art, the storytelling, and the lettering, and we're going to be using a rubric for this for the first time, so let's see how it goes. Hey, Walter here, doing what I can to make comics easier because it shouldn't be overwhelming or daunting to tell your story. I make videos about making comics, so if that is something you're into, make sure you hit that subscribe button. So today we're going to be reviewing your comics, and for the first time we're going to be trying out version 1.0 of a scoring rubric that was suggested by a few of the viewers from the last video. So we're going to try that out. Hopefully it's going to add a little bit more structure and make these videos a lot more helpful and a lot more functional. If you have any ideas on how to improve or add to these critique videos, be sure to let me know in the comments so that we can make these as good as they can possibly be. But first up, we have Class Z by Fran. Alright, so the summary for this one reads as Naymare, Kuru, Zyron, Cat, Fleur, Blake, and Flynn are the students of Class Z in the Red Skull Magic Academy. Naymare is a new member of the class who mysteriously appeared in the academy. She has a dangerous secret only she and Professor San know, but Naymare is not the only one with a secret. As the story progresses, we will learn that the secrets about each character, while the secrets and past stories are revealed. Class Z is competing in the magical battles with the other magic academies. So that is a lot of names being thrown around, a lot of information that's kind of hard to keep track of for a simple summary. That might just be a personal preference on my part, but I want summaries to read quick and then suck me in as fast as possible. I'd focus more on Class Z. Are they special in some way? Are they the elite class? Are they the sucky team? So we could try something a little bit more like Red Skull Magic Academy is full of secrets, but when a mysterious new student arrives, the secrets become dangerous. Can Class Z unravel the mysteries while keeping their grades up and surviving magic duels with rival schools? You know, something like that that's quick, that is going to draw the readers in, just giving them enough information to know what they're going to be reading about, but not so much information that they're just going to be overwhelmed. Alright, so I gotta mention that it's gonna be hard to avoid spoilers with these videos. I will do my best to try to keep it vague, but it's gonna happen. But I'll try not to do anything where I'm like, hey, you know when this main character dies right here? Yeah, you drew his ear wrong. Alright, so the setup, it has a super strong start. There's instant mystery. Who is she? Why is she locked up? Who has her locked up? What was that ghosty thing that she was looking at? That's a ton of reasons to keep reading, so really smart start. Pacing. So far these two episodes have a really good speed to them. The second episode is a lot of info dump, but I think you handled it in a good way. You took the rip the band-aid off approach, which makes a ton of sense for something that is very technical, like the rules for a tournament or something. You know, trying to finesse those rules and all those regulations into the story can take a long time, and the reader might forget all the stuff that you mentioned previously. So the rip the band-aid off is a good way to handle that. Plus you're combining it with a lot of fun art and information graphics, and in the grand scheme of things, it's not really overly weighty as far as info dumps are concerned. Could it be shorter? Sure, it could be something like competitions. Yeah, there are two other schools, the Gold Wings and the Blue Hearts. Each school selects the best class to face off against the other two schools. Class Z is always in the top two classes of Red Skull Academy, but our class is always number one. But honestly, I like what you have already. The hope is within the next chapter or two, we can start seeing what this comic is really going to be about. Maybe not a giant epic class versus class battle, but maybe a spell or something being cast to trip somebody or throw a plate across the room. Just a little bit of taste of what the story and the mechanics of the story are going to be. Characters, I got a general sense of who the characters are. You took the rip off the band-aid approach again with the character intros, which is fine with you're using the character title cards. Just remember to keep bringing these names up in conversation. It is a lot of characters to remember for your readers, so you want to keep throwing those names out there. Dialogue. The dialogue is working okay, but there are some parts that read a little unnaturally. Also, some of the grammar and punctuation stuff is wrong. Example here, you have, we always end between the two winners of Red Skull, but. That reads a little bit weird. I had to read it like twice or 3 times to try to figure out exactly what you're saying. It should be something more along the lines of we are always in the top 2 of Red Skull, but it could also just be a native language thing. If that's the case, you might have to share the comic with other people, get their feedback on what is wrong or what isn't. Otherwise, it's just going to take a lot of time watching a lot of English movies, reading a lot of English comics to try to kind of get more comfortable with how conversations naturally flow if you're a native speaker. Also, don't forget you want to end all of your sentences with periods, and if you have multiple thoughts in a sentence, you always want to use a comma. A more interesting thing that I noticed though is that over the 2 episodes, there really isn't any dialogue, meaning a back and forth conversation between characters, which is a big warning sign of info dumps, which we already talked about, but be careful with that in future episodes. We need to see the characters engaging with each other if we really want to learn about their personalities and also learn about the group dynamic. So clarity, the story is pretty clear. I know what is going on. The only time I really got confused is when Nene was getting her shot in episode 1. I wasn't sure if it was one of the 2 teachers. By the way, I don't know the name of one of these teachers. I don't know if that person's important, but I'm guessing that there was a 3rd person in the room with Nene that was going to give her shot. So not a big deal. I had to kind of look around and see if I missed a panel or something. So I had to stop and think about what was actually going on and who that person was. And the last thing that you want is for your readers to be thinking. Also, at the end of episode 1, you show this blood and this arm. I don't know if it's Nene's arm or the nurse's arm, but I had to scroll back up and I figured out it was the nurse's arm because of the skin color. But if you put something more unique on the nurse's arm, it would read more instantly that that was the nurse's arm, and I wouldn't have to scroll up and try to figure stuff out based on skin tones. Engagement, I am pretty well engaged. There's mystery, there's magic. I want to know what's going on with all these characters. I want to see these battles that are hopefully going to be coming up soon. At the end of episode 1, you kind of ended on this crazy moment of this bloody arm, and it's kind of like WTF, but then you start off the next episode and you completely forget about this bloody arm, what it meant, what it means. So that's a little bit of a cheat cliffhanger. What you could have done to like fix this is maybe had somebody mention, like, did you hear what happened to the nurse? Like, she died, or if it's not something that crazy, you know, like, did you hear what happened to the nurse? She went crazy, or anything like that. So it's not just kind of like, oh my God, there's a bloody arm. What does it all mean? And then in episode 2, you're kind of like, yeah, don't worry about that bloody arm. It's fine. Okay, let's move on to the art. Let's talk about the thumbnail. So this thumbnail is a little bit dark. I think I would up the contrast to make the character a little bit more visible, get that pop. If you look at every single thumbnail for all of the Webtoon original comics, do you notice something that they're all doing? All right, so panel size and placement. For the most part, all your panels seem okay. There are a few panels that are a little bit large. They're not going to completely fit on a phone screen. They're definitely not going to fit on a computer screen. For example, you have these character action pose title cards. I wasn't able to see these on my phone screen in all their glory, so I kind of had to scroll up and down to see the entire thing. If you shrunk those, they would completely fit on the screen and I'd be able to enjoy it as a single illustration. So for the most part, you don't want images to be more than 1200 pixels tall if you want them to fit on a phone, and you don't want them to be more than 700 pixels tall if you want them to fit on a computer screen. Storytelling, everything is pretty clear, which is the most important thing. I never got lost with what was happening in the scene, other than with the whole nurse scene that we talked about earlier. Expressions, all your expressions are all right. They do feel a little bit of middle of the road, but nothing too crazy happens in the story, so it kind of makes sense that there's not going to be any over-the-top expressions. But you mostly have like medium smiles. Take right here, for example, he's complaining about explaining things once again, but his face and his posture are pretty static. He seems more thoughtful than annoyed or resigned. Poses, these action poses right here for the title cards are really great. The normal poses are a little bit more rigid. All your shoulders are kind of just straight across. Everyone's standing with perfect posture. Most of the times when people are standing or sitting, they're shifting their weight between their different legs, or they're leaning their weight on one elbow versus another elbow. So unless you have this amazing posture like a robot, you're probably gonna want to shift your your weight around on different legs or arms or something. Backgrounds, pretty solid work on the backgrounds. Everything is clear. I know exactly where we are. Some of these outside shots of the school look awesome. There's not a lot of life or personality in some of these drawings, but putting a lot of life and character into your backgrounds is really hard and really time consuming. So what you have right here is getting the job done, which I think is the most important thing. I wouldn't worry too much about adding a lot of crazy stuff unless you find that stuff fun, but it's not necessary. Composition, a lot of your camera angles are straight on eye level panels, and this not a huge fan of having to draw all these crazy dynamic panels to make things interesting. But throwing in the occasional like low angle, high angle for specific panels could be used to great effect to kind of get the emotion across. For example, this panel of Nene here showing her kind of showing off her power would be a really good excuse to toss in a low angle shot to kind of enhance that spookiness. Character design, I think there's a nice variation in the character outfits even though they're wearing a uniform. So the way they're wearing it kind of speaks to their personalities. And all your females are pretty distinct in their body shapes and in their hairstyles. But the guys, on the other hand, are kind of just all these sexy dudes with emo cuts. Not that I have anything against cool emo hair. But if you were to remove the color, then they can be a little bit hard to distinguish. The color works pretty well for me, nothing insane or distracting, and the magic that you did do looks really cool. All right, for lettering, let's talk about the font. All your fonts are okay. You do a lot of these long length sentences, which I think can be shortened into a more circular shape, which I prefer. I think it breaks up the line width. Word count, which helps with the reading. It kind of speeds the reading up, makes it more simple versus reading this really long line. You keep changing your font size. I think you're doing this to fit your dialogue into a panel. Also, when you shrink these down, it starts getting harder to read on a phone. So try to keep the size consistent. Try to keep them at a larger size unless you have a storytelling reason for it, like shouting or whispering, not just because you're running out of room. If you are running out of room, it's probably better just to reuse the panel art and split the dialogue across a copy and pasted panel, or you can just find a way to shorten the dialogue so that it fits. For example, this one panel where he is talking about the prizes, you could shorten this down to the prizes are always different, trips, money, etc. The rumor is this year's prize is going to be something more insane than ever, but no one has any idea what it is. Like, that would be all you would need, and that would definitely fit in that panel. Balloons, okay, you need to watch the spacing between the balloon edge and where the lettering is. A lot of the times you have the lettering touching the very edge of the balloon, and this can make things feel cramped. You can make the balloon a little bit bigger, kind of give a letter's width between the balloon outside and the start of a letter. You also change the shape of your balloon. Like, sometimes you have the oval, and then sometimes you kind of have this more organic shape. And also the tail width of your balloons varies a lot from one panel to the next. You want to try to keep all of this stuff more consistent so people start not noticing your lettering and it kind of just blends, and they start thinking that they're actually hearing the character speak versus they're reading something. Placement, the placement of your balloons are really good. I never read anything out of order, so that part was clear. So I want to mention that reviews and critiques are inherently biased because of our own personal aesthetics and preferences. I do try to keep these as grounded into traditionally accepted best practices and guidelines, but even those are just rules that were created by some old dudes back in the day, and they've carried forth to become what we accept as the rules. but this is why rules is used very loosely when we're discussing art. The only important rule is that if you're digging this comic, you should hit that like button, and if you haven't already hit sub, you should definitely hit sub too. Next up is Cupid Pizza, also from Frafran. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this one because a lot of the issues are the same issues that were from Class Z. Alright, so the thumbnail is pretty good, a lot of character acting with the pose and the expression. It's really intriguing, like why is this dude surprised and pulling back, and why did this lady launch a ninja kiss attack? Though, would it be better with a completely white background? Maybe. Alright, so the summary is Farah and Aaron meet each other in a funny way for us, but not for them. After their first encounter, they hope to never see each other again, but thanks to pizza, they continue to meet even though they don't want to. Maybe Cupid is not a baby with wings like we see in many places and is a slice of pizza. So this summary is pretty similar to Class Z. It's focusing on some stuff that we don't really know, like they meet in a weird way, but not for them. I mean, it would be better if it was weird for them also. We don't have to question, like, why is it weird for us but not for them? So we want to make the summary just a little bit more clear. We want to focus on the big picture, what the story is about and why it's different from other stories and why we should read it. So we could start it like this instead. Faya and Aaron's relationship started as a bitter rivalry over an exclusive collectible toy. Their dreams of never seeing each other again is foiled by pizza, but is pizza enough to dissolve their silly rivalry? Maybe Cupid was never a baby with wings, but really a warm slice of delicious pizza. Cupid never tasted so good. Okay, so maybe not that last part because that's kind of gross, but you get the general idea. I will say some of the issues regarding expressions and backgrounds are more prevalent in this comic, but it is a slice of life comic, so I think it is a little bit more acceptable. An example here, he says, "Why does she look so sad?" But when I look at her, she doesn't really look sad. She looks more coy or playful, kind of like she's growing to like him. You want to try to act out your emotions with your face and kind of feel what your face is doing, and then you can draw that into your comic, or maybe just get a mirror or your phone, so it's not quite as weird. With your background, you go very minimal, which I find really impressive. It shows that you don't need a lot to ground your readers into a scene, but I think sometimes it can get a little bit too minimal. Let's take this scene for example. This is where we start, and I'm wondering where we are. Are we at a rave club? Like what's going on exactly? I have no idea. I have no frame of reference. And we don't really know where we are until about 5 panels in, and we don't ever actually see this room in its entirety at all. Not super important, but it is kind of important to kind of know where we are, like what kind of place we're in. And if you did show her apartment, it would give her a better idea of who she is. Is she in a small apartment, in a big apartment? Is it messy? Is it clean? That can give us a lot of insight into who she is as a person. Also, there is a lot of white space between all of your panels, and your word balloons are really far away from the artwork. However, it looks like you fixed this in your more recent episodes, so you can ignore that if that's something that you've realized on your own. But I think you kind of swung all the way to the other side, and now some of your panels in the newer episodes feel really tight. So that might be something you want to look at. Look at other original comics and see what they're doing, what kind of spacing they're using. And I think for your logo that you start all your episodes off with is a little bit too close to the top, especially when I'm looking at it on the phone. So you might want to lower that like 200, 300 pixels just to get it a little bit lower down on the screen. I think the story starts off really strong, and you get to the point very quickly on what this story is going to be about these two characters kind of getting over their initial dislike of each other to maybe grow into a strong relationship. But you are doing a lot of quick story jumps, which does keep it moving forward, but it doesn't give the world, it doesn't give the characters a lot of room to breathe and grow more naturally. Like, her deciding to go out with this guy wasn't ever really a conversation. It was mostly her friends just saying, go out with him. and then all of a sudden she's going out with him, which isn't bad if the discussion isn't that important, and really the important thing is the date that they're going to go on, which is perfectly fine, but just something to pay attention to if you did that intentionally or not intentionally. And it doesn't really do anything to grow her friends as important characters in the story. So if her friends are supposed to be important, you might want to spend a little bit more time with them. And then for composition, something you want to pay attention to is where you're actually putting your characters. For example, let's take this scene where they're sitting at a table having a conversation. Aaron is on the right, Farah is on the left. Speaking of the character names, I kind of had to search around for the characters' names. I'm really bad with character names in comics in general, so take what I'm saying with a grain of salt, but I really like my names hammered into my head when I'm starting a comic off. You also have this character card chart that you have in episode 2, I think, which is a good way to get the names across, but you really want to get it into the conversation of the story. Okay, back to the scene with Aaron on the right, Farah on the left. Then in the next panel, Farah is on the right and Aaron is on the left. And they're also close-up panels, and they both have dark black hair. So you could see how this could be confusing at first glance. Though I will say I like this interaction in general as a whole. It's a really good character moment, and the punchline for the whole conversation is really funny. Overall, I would say it is a really cute slice of life comic with really good character interactions, and the art does the job really well. Before we move on, I want to say I'm mostly going to focus on the storytelling aspects of comics, like what is going to make your story come across more clearly to your reader, and I'm not going to focus on things like better anatomy or better perspective because having a really well-drawn bicep isn't going to tell your story any more clearly than just drawing a noodle arm. So just have in the back of your head when you're doing your comic anatomy, backgrounds, perspective, that's stuff that you're always going to be getting better at. The more you draw, the more things you draw, those things are going to improve naturally. So if I'm not talking about your anatomy, don't just assume that you have 100% best anatomy ever. Just assume that you're always going to have to be improving at those things. Let's move on to the next comic. All right, so we have Evil Call by P. Monkey, the animator. All right, so let's go ahead and start with the summary. So the summary is: being forcefully thrown through a portal to a high-tech planet, a 16-year-old boy has to travel throughout the galaxy to get to Earth to save it from enslavement. Evil Call takes heavy inspiration from the Dark Lord himself, H.P. Lovecraft, and other dark media. Updates weekly on Sunday. This works pretty well. It is kind of a complex sentence, so I think that could be simplified a little bit. Maybe something like, a 16-year-old boy is sucked through a portal and left stranded on a high-tech planet. Now he must brave a dangerous journey through the galaxy if he ever hopes to save the Earth. Okay, setup. Really strong start. You show us what kind of person Kumar is, and then you jump right into the catalyst for the story. Functional and fast, my favorite things. Then you get right in and then show us who this other character's shape is as a person, and we get right back into the story and we're chugging along quick. Pacing, really great. The episodes read with a lot of energy. Enough stuff is happening in every episode to keep my hunger satisfied, but also short enough and engaging enough to make me want to keep reading more. Characters, I think you have 2 fun main characters. All the characters are really distinct and you've established their personalities really well. Dialogue. All right, so the dialogue does get a bit exposition-y at times. Example, in the first episode, the kid has a dream about this weird alien monster thing, and he wakes up and he says, "That was a crazy nightmare just now, and that thing breaking out of the crystal, it felt so angry." Like, we saw the dream, we saw all the stuff that is happening, so we could change the dialogue to something a little bit more fun, a little bit more character building. Like maybe he wakes up and he's like, "What the hell, killer space monsters? I really need to lay off the spicy food before bed." You know, something more natural. We saw what was happening in the dream. We don't need the dialogue to repeat what we just saw. Then there's this conversation that he has with his mom. It's a little heavy-handed and it could be shortened a little bit as well. So we could do something like, "Mom, you know I don't have time for all of that. And then mom could be like, I know, I'm sorry. And then Kumar is like, it's not your fault. You work 2 jobs, you pay for anything, and I want to do my part. That's what family does. And then she looks at him and she's like, I'd fall apart without you, my little man. And then also the whole like, I'd fall apart without you is kind of foreshadowing, right? You know, right? Like, you know, foreshadowing. Clarity, clear as crystal. I don't know what that's saying. Clear, crystal is not really clear, so maybe clear as glass. All right, so engagement, I think it's very engaging. You've established these characters really well. We know who they are. I'm excited about these 2 characters. We know what their stakes are. The Earth is in danger. More importantly, his mother needs him. Shapes has something to prove to himself and everybody on his planet. So each episode is also ending with a reason to keep reading more. All right, let's move on to the art and the thumbnail. More than half of this thumbnail is being wasted. Up at the top, there's just nothing happening up here. I think Kumar needs to be a lot larger in this panel and add a lot of contrast to them so he kind of pops off the background. Panel size and placement. This is all working pretty fine for me. Sometimes the panels feel a little bit cramped together, so maybe give it a little bit more space. Storytelling, you've done a lot. You have a lot of different camera angles, and you're using them pretty well for the emotion of that scene for that particular panel. There is this scene right here where the character jumps out of a window, and all that we get is the sound effect of drop in the background. I think you could have done more here. You could have added a panel where the character is climbing out of the window, maybe another panel where he is jumping out. Just something a little bit more than just a panel back here with drop in there. Actually, the first time I completely missed it when I read it. Plus it adds a little bit more action, like he climbs out this window and just jumps straight out to the ground like he has no cares to give. Gives a lot of insight into who he is and what he's willing to do. Poses, pretty strong here for the action poses. A lot of the standing poses kind of suffer from that straight perfect posture syndrome. So the same advice, try to shift the weight around. If you can find some like simple clothes catalogs, you can see how the models are standing. Sometimes a little bit exaggerated, but you'll get the idea of how they're shifting their weight. Most of the times when we're doing anatomy studies, we're always looking at these crazy dynamic poses, but we also need to be looking at simple standing, simple sitting poses as well, so we can see how the body kind of naturally holds its weight. Backgrounds, the Earth backgrounds are really solid. On the alien planet though, things start getting a little too abstract. I can make out mostly what I'm seeing, but there are a few panels where it takes me a little bit longer to figure out what that is. For example, in this panel, I'm not really sure what is happening in this panel at all. I think part of the problem is that everything on the alien planet is becoming very two-dimensional. These buildings no longer have any third dimension of depth. And a lot of the panels are also very close in on the action, so it's kind of hard to get a frame of reference. With Earth architecture, we have like years and years of visual reference, but with alien architecture, we can't identify stuff as easily because we don't know what their stuff looks like. So if you're really close in, we're not going to know what that is. Like, what does an alien door actually look like? And I guess it's a pink wall that you kind of just walk through. As humans, we're not going to have a reference for that, but we do have a reference for it. Is kind of a shape of a door. So if you were to pull back and kind of show this shape with a frame around it, we would get a better idea that that was a door that we were standing next to. Compositions, well done. I think you have a lot of different camera angles and you're using them really well to kind of show the emotion of that panel. Color, I think the colors are really nice and vibrant without burning out my retina, which sometimes dark saturated colors can do. Also the simple backgrounds and the bold background color really helps to have the action pop forward and be very clear. All right, let's talk about lettering and font. So your spacing between your lines is a little bit big, but not too egregious, and you're kind of also bouncing back and forth between shorter lines and longer lines. I prefer to keep them a little bit shorter for the reasons I mentioned earlier. It's just clearer, faster to read. and you're also not kind of keeping that circular diamond shape that I've talked about before. Check out one of my other lettering videos for more details. Balloons, again, watch for the tightness of the balloon around the lettering. You don't want the balloon and the lettering to be touching, otherwise it's pretty clean. Placement, I think the placement is working really well. I never read anything out of order. Consistency, I think it's pretty consistent. You are changing the font size occasionally, but I think you're doing it for yelling, which is a storytelling thing. Otherwise, for the plain dialogue, it seems mostly consistent. Okay, that's it for today. If you want one of these critiques, I currently have the submission form closed because I have a huge queue of comics to get through, about 40 comics. So it's gonna take me a while. I did add a Patreon reward that kind of acts as an express pass if you want to get your comic reviewed sooner. Now, you don't have to support me on Patreon to get your comic reviewed. I am going to review all the comics that are in that queue eventually. It's just going to take me a while. So if you need to get your comic reviewed earlier for whatever reason, check out that reward tier on Patreon. I also added another limited reward for a mentorship. Like if you feel like you need more guidance or you want more help with all aspects of comic and art, then check out that reward tier on Patreon if that is something that you're into. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and work through these as they are in the queue and kind of just take them in order. So what did you guys think of the rubric that I used? Let me know in the comments, or if you have anything you want to add to that, or if you think the original video that I did worked better. I sort of like the rubric and I sort of don't. I feel like it kind of forces me into a bucket, and sometimes I want things to be a little bit more natural. I also felt that some of the categories could be tightened up because there was overlap, or they didn't quite say the right thing that I wanted to say. So let me know what you think. Let me know if you like the freeform version, if you like the rubric version, if there's some kind of combination or completely different version that you can think of. Let me know. And if you want to keep making comics easier, be sure to like, link, love, hug, and hit that sub button for more sweet, sweet goodness. Peace.